All right, so with our handsome Mr. A, ready, we'll do a little find it. So I know that you guys were also wondering about a few other skills. We did dive into obviously some of the resource guarding topics um, and some loose leash walk-in and of course a little bit of everything. But he's just warming up, of course, while I'm blabbing with a couple find its and then reorienting to me with some check-ins or some, gazing my direction. Um, what we're going to try to touch base on is a little bit with proper hellos. So if, for example, you are coming into the home or you're going to have family members or guests come over, I would highly recommend to, for example, make sure that what you're practicing, you're also applying to yourselves and not just only in the new situations. Some folks by accident will give a lot of mixed signals. And what I mean by that is your babe is sometimes being told, hop on up to visit me, but then being told, don't hop up on so-and-so. So I would recommend if you really do want to have your pups come up and either visit you or climb up or do like, again, a little moment where they're reaching up towards you, I'd put it on a cue. So what I mean by that is you might say, come say hi, or come visit, or give me a hug, or some sort of slogan that tends to mean come on up and you can come check in. Otherwise, all four on the floor could be what you're trying to capture and reinforce. So if, let's say, for example, if he was really struggling, even as you guys were entering the environment, I would highly recommend to have a couple treat stations, which I know I've mentioned in the past, where you could have little zones where you have Tupperware containers or, whatever little configuration you'd like for an item to hold treats. If they're going to be, again, higher value treats that need refrigeration, I would only have them, of course, stashed out when you're there and available so you can put them away when you're done working. So typically I recommend freeze-dried treats or jerkies mixed with some training treats that are, again, going to stay okay without having to be refrigerated. So that way, as you're working by walking into the environment, you can go right into some find its. You might redirect him and work for a couple little skills. So maybe he's able to offer a sit when he's a little excited, great. But if, let's say, for example, he can't manage to hold still and you keep asking over and over, down, sit, off, no, knock it off. Remember that from his perspective, nice job, sir, he might be getting a lot of attention for what you have deemed inappropriate, but he's just excited that you're back and maybe he's also a little overwhelmed. So remember, dogs will also sometimes will jump and mouth and be a little bit spastic when they're also a little overwhelmed and flustered. That there can be, of course, excitement that you're back, and that's all perfectly fine. But we just want to make sure that we're not by accident making it harder on him when we first come in. So again, I like warming up with some of these find its. It just gets him up and wiggling. So if, let's say, for example, maybe I'll practice with my half door. You could also, if you know company's coming over, of course, start him off on leash. So he could be wearing his harness. He could be rocking his leash. He could also be set up in another section of the home with a baby gate, a corral. Maybe if he's got a crate or a safe little zone, he could be enjoying a frozen Kong or a chew item. And then when company comes in and they're nice and settled, then you could go and grab him and work those skills. The problem with sometimes just letting him get to visit when he's most excited is that normally when he's most excited, he has a hard time regulating maybe his body. And when you increase that arousal, you tend to increase his ability to be unable to hone back in, if that makes sense. So if he's super jazzed, it's almost like my little humans. Let's say they were going to be going to a birthday party. We arrived too early and now we have to sit around and wait for the party to get started. If I just told them, like, why don't you just simmer down and still sit still, even though they just came from a nice big car ride, we probably would have a harder time with them relaxing in the stationary position. So sometimes we might get up and walk around and discuss what we're going to work on in like, let's say, for example, it's a bouncy place. We might be like, oh, let's work on this one. That one looks like a lot of fun. And then that way we keep their bodies and minds occupied while they can't quite yet go on the obstacle course. So for Mr. Handsome, if he can't quite go and visit your friend, or he can't come and visit grandma or whatever it might be, we can at least work a find it. We could then work maybe a touch or another skill to replace the behavior we don't love with something we'd prefer. Some dogs do amazing with like a slow feed bowl. Maybe you've got one stationed right as you step in. You get into the routine of practicing stepping out of your home, stepping in, and right into a find it in the slow feed bowl. That way you're giving Mr. A an awesome target to hone in on that. He's like, that one rolled too far away. Was it too hard to find? So, but then that way you're giving him a target other than you or the person as the only novel thing in that environment. So let's say, for example, this is going to be like my little, half door, which could be technically like a real door. He's like, yes, I'd love to come join you. I'm just going to move my curtains so you can see a little bit better. So let's say this is going to be like pretend my door for coming into the building from, let's say, outside. If the real doorways, though, are really challenging, like you've got door dashing, so like where he tries to escape through the doorway as someone comes in, I would highly recommend to practice some of these thresholds with doors that don't go anywhere. So for some folks, they'll practice with like a bedroom doorway, or they'll practice with a bathroom doorway. You can also practice sometimes with a baby gate, and maybe you're doing, again, from the living room to the kitchen, having your puppy practice holding back, and then you step into the environment with them. But if, let's say, he is super mouthy, super all over the place, it could be that he's actually a little stressed. He could be just really excited, doesn't know where to put those big boy emotions, because again, remember, he's a teenager, which means that they're still learning how to regulate, and sort of, since their body and mind are under construction, he may not always know what to do with himself when he feels those big emotions. Right now, he's, again, just doing a great job just getting warmed up with some of these great find its. Ready? Find it. So that way, while I'm blabbing, I can keep his body and his mind occupied, so he's not either barking or doing something maybe I don't love or jumping all over me or whatever the main potential thought on his end could have been. So again, let's say I'm going to start practicing with a threshold. So this could be a doorway that goes nowhere. So this could be the doorway to, again, your bedroom or a bathroom. So if, let's say, he tends to rush doorways because he does get a little bit overwhelmed at times and kind of is worried he's going to get left behind, I, for example, might go right into a nice big find it and then go over towards my doorway and go sneak in. And then while he's on the other side, if he gets a little overwhelmed, we're just going to do a couple find its. Obviously, this is where baby gates could be easier. So you'll see that he's kind of doing some jumping. I'm just going to let him sort of get in the groove, get a little cozy, realize that I'm not really going anywhere. Ready? Find it. And that I'm just practicing behind this buffer. If, for example, your babe doesn't quite settle when you're trying to step out of range or work a few skills, remember there are some other underlying behaviors that could be happening. So like, for example, separation anxiety could be something that is going on. If you're really struggling with some of that, those topics, there are some great video resources that I had sent along in the beginning that are, again, other trainers or other great video resources that dive into some of these skills. So ready, sit, nice. We'll see if you can catch. Oh, so close. So let's say, pretend I'm going to be entering the home in just a moment. So just to keep him out of my bubble for a second. So if this was a real doorway, there'd be no one, again, being able to toss snacks to get him off the door. But let's say I'm coming into my house. This is my door. I'm entering the building. And of course, Mr. Ethan says, worst day of my life, why aren't we wrestling? He and Mr. Allston have become really good friends, and they really like to wrestle and have some nice WrestleMania throughout their stay here. So again, no food for the handsome man. I'm going to be coming in through my doorway. I have a handful of goodies, and I'd go right into a little find it. And if, let's say, for example, he's a little bit unsure about the door in the beginning, this is where doing several reps is going to be really helpful. If, let's say, he came at you a little too eager beaver, I either recommend a bigger stash of a find it to keep him busy longer to help get him more calm a little bit faster. So the benefit of a multi-snack toss for the find its is, again, it's almost like the piñata just broke open and all the candy's on the floor. It's going to keep you busy picking up all those little morsels. If I only tossed one snack, he might finish it and then come right back at me, not in a bad way, but he might just be so eager that might be he jumps all over me. Maybe he mouths. Maybe he knocks something out of my hands when he's a little too excited. So remember, your puppies are not trying to be naughty. They're not trying to be obnoxious. They're not trying to be domineering. He's just doing whatever behavior makes him either feel safe, comfortable, or gives him a reinforcement from his perspective. So if, let's say, him jumping all over me was like, oh my gosh, I've missed you too, you're so stinking cute, and he was then jumping on me and it didn't feel so good, I might by accident be fueling those flames. So make sure you're not adding more lighter fluid to a flame that's already a bit big. It's only going to get bigger, and then we can't get mad if we were the ones that by accident threw in the lighter fluid. So I would recommend, think, what would I rather have the handsome guy do? and then see if you could gain those behaviors from him. So again, I'm going to go ahead and practice once more, going through my little threshold. So if he tends to be a door dasher, I like to go ahead and do a little find it, practice with my door, and then get him to realize that me stepping through it does not equal anything negative. So like he gets a little bit anxious, so I'm just going to go right into some find it's. So in the very beginning, he always thinks I'm going to be leaving the poor munchkin alone. If he's really unsure, I'm going to toss the snacks a little closer to him so he doesn't feel the need to go quite as far if distance for the beginning is a little challenging. So right now I'm doing a little bit of a multi-step moment where if when you go out of range, your puppy gets a little overwhelmed, I don't want to make it into the full dynamic where I'm completely out of visual range if that's hard for him. I know Mr. E says, why can't I go practice? So Mr. E will have his turn after. So let's say, for example, our handsome guy is doing a great job with some of these find it's. We would then go and practice as if we're stepping into the home environment. So if the real doorway, like I mentioned, creates too much anxiety or frustration, start without the real door, go right into, for example, a pretend door, which isn't pretend, but it doesn't go anywhere. So that way you're not getting him flustered with the real threshold instantly. So now from there, you can go into like maybe a little sit if his thinking brain is connected to his body. If he's just in over arousal or feeling overwhelmed or just whatever it might be for a big emotion, he's not going to be able to function doing those stationary positions. So a lot of times people will enter the environment, they're like, no, off, down, stop it. And they kind of go through their spewage of words. Remember, the more you say something and your babe doesn't understand what you're asking, the more likely that your dog is going to not associate those words with those skills. So if we were working, for example, like the sitting position, you guys have had such a nice deposit into this account again, where he knows that sitting has a lot of great value. So he might be able to offer it much more readily, even when he's a little excited or overwhelmed. But remember, if you're not able to get stationary positions from the handsome guy, you can easily do motion. So maybe this is where we might find, again, movement with those find it's. Targeting, for example, a slow feed bowl where he can then forage or scavenge for snacks and kind of work that sniffer. Because what we're trying to do is if his game is not as up to par as we need, like he doesn't know the skills and how to use them in the hard moment, we want to think of dog-centric skills that might be easy enough for him to attain and therefore do that instead. So maybe you enter the building and there's a toy he hasn't seen all day. Here you go right into a toy into his mouth. He goes and frolics and does that. And now he's not pummeling you with the, obviously, loves. If you do want to go and love him up, I would recommend all four on the floor if you really are not loving the jumping up, so it stays consistent. But just realize that at times when your dog is jumping, it's typically out of excitement, anxiety, sometimes some frustration. So there's normally emotion behind skills. Or behavior, I should say. Nice. So right here he's doing a real nice job. We could, again, go into a little sit. So let's say I wanted to give him a little bit of attention. If, let's say, your babe likes snuggles, likes some pats, nice job, you could start to pair keeping all four with some snacks or the affection. Remember, though, if he still starts to mouth, oh, chew them, sir. He did not chew that hot dog. There it goes again. Very impressive. Do you want to eat it? It looks delicious. So let's say Mr. A, as you go to reach down and pat him, he starts to think that pats equal we're about to wrestle. This is where dogs can sometimes either not love touch because they don't know you that well or they're not a huge fan of being touched. Good shake off, sir. He's like, you tickled my ear. But if, let's say, for example, sometimes I did a shake off after I touched him, that normally means that it was maybe a little overwhelming. So remember, just because your dog tolerates something doesn't mean they love it. So almost like when grandma comes to love you up and she squeezes your cheeks when you were little, you might love grandma, but you don't always love what grandma does to you. The same thing with your dog is they might tolerate it, but they really don't love it. So you would want to gauge what is reinforcing to him. And when we go to touch a dog, is it something he actually wants to participate in? Or sometimes when we actually add touch and then your dog starts to mouth you, they either, one, think you're playing, or two, think that the mouthing was a little bit stressful and they want to have you go away with the hands, and the mouthing is what's happening to try to get you to stop touching. So remember that a lot of times dogs will communicate in ways that make sense to them, and a lot of times kind of confuses us or we misinterpret it. So Mr. A is doing a really nice job with some of these little introductories here through the doorway. If you're really struggling with proper hellos, I mean, obviously do check in. But I would recommend start on gear, use management. It's your best friend. Create things he could do instead to replace, nice job, the skills you don't want him doing. Maybe let's say he hasn't done much with a hand target. You could also work a touch behavior. So again, I'm going to offer my hand, touch, and I'm going to feed him for that little response. So again, touch, nice, and we feed for that. So right now he's mostly booping my hand because he's hoping there's a snack near or on it. And eventually, touch, nice, can turn into a behavior. Maybe you offer a couple lovely touches to keep him on the ground. So maybe he's excited that you're home. You could go ahead and go into a little touch. He's like, no, that seems silly. I'd like to do a high five. If, again, touch is new to him, don't worry if there's a bit of a learning moment. Touch is different than a high five or paw, though. So if your babe is trying to give you feet, make sure your hand signal is different than an open palm if that's what you tend to use for that. So if you'd rather do a closed hand or fingers to boop, he's like, let's get comfortable. Good job. So if you wanted to do a different hand signal for a hand target, feel free to pick one that makes sense to you guys. So some folks have done a closed fist. They go touch, the dog boops, and we feed for that. Nice job. So touch, again, is just getting your dog to boop your hand, but this can transition to many other really helpful skills. So it could be into targeting, getting them moving around an environment, move away from a distraction, hold sometimes a hand touch target and move through an environment. So you can really build on to your touch cue and kind of finesse it and make it more advanced as they're progressing. But for the proper hellos, just make sure that if, let's say, there's a moment where you know he's not going to be successful, don't even bother doing it. So a lot of times people will think, oh my gosh, my dog's super friendly. We should just go visit everybody to kind of get him over it. The problem with that is a lot of times he always gets to the thing he was hoping, and typically when he's most excited. And then let's say a day when someone doesn't want to say hi or he can't go visit, there's going to be that frustration, which could then turn into that barking, lunging, and what could look like bigger behaviors that we're not a huge fan of. So remember that a lot of your hellos could actually be more of an approach and disengage, an approach and watch, maybe watching the thing pass you by. But if every time the thing or person or whatever it might be comes and visits, the problem there is what happens when he can't visit. So we want to practice both ends of that spectrum, where at times novelty could be ignored and other times novelty could be something we could go visit. But Mr. A did a really nice job with these skills, so I'm just going to give him a little breather from this, and we'll work a few more items in just a moment. But very nice job, Mr. A. Such a smart boy. He says, I'm already winded.